The U.S. has proposed a draft resolution at the UN Security Council, which calls for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. It has also warned Israel against invading the overcrowded city of Rafah. The U.S. has previously avoided the word ceasefire during UN votes on the war, but President Joe Biden has made similar comments. However, the U.S. plans to veto another draft resolution from Algeria, which calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Meanwhile, reports say at least one Palestinian man has been killed and many others wounded in northern Gaza after Israeli forces opened fire on desperate crowds waiting for food aid. This comes as calls are still being made for an end to the Israel-Hamas war. There is more in this report.
Video released by the IDF on Tuesday shows an airstrike on Khan Yunis, in which they say affected dozens with more terrorists eliminated. Videos also released by the IDF shows an airstrike in Marwahin, Lebanon, with the IDF stating that Hezbollah infrastructure was destroyed in the strike. A video from Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, Gaza, shows patients lying in darkness as rescue workers use torch to navigate the corridors. These all comes amid calls for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has begun a campaign against unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, saying that direct negotiations between the parties are the only path to establishing one. He stated this during an address.
One thing that I think we can agree on many things, but one thing Israel cannot agree to is an international diktat that would seek to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, basically force a Palestinian state on Israel after the horror of October 7th. And you should know that the people of Israel are really united in this.
In another development, EU foreign affairs ministers are discussing the situation in the Middle East, including developments on the ground and in the wider region. This comes as EU ministers will also have an informal exchange of views with the United Nations Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Corridor for Gaza, Sigrid Kaag, who will be physically present at the meeting. Sigrid Kaag, during an interview, speaks on the assumed planned operation in Rafah.
I think the Secretary General has been very clear. The consequences, potential consequences of such an operation at present time would be disastrous. There are more than 1 million people crammed in Rafah. It's not intended for 1 million people in shelters, in random plastic sheeted constructions. Health conditions are very worrisome. We know that aid is not sufficient to get in. It's harder and harder to distribute. We also have to acknowledge the fact that the security conditions, separate from military operations, due to what is called self-distribution by desperate civilians, but also looting and criminalization, is hampering efforts by the humanitarian community, UN and international or local NGOs to deliver assistance to the people that actually need it.
The reconstruction corridor also argued that there is no substitute for UNRWA's role in getting aid to victims despite allegations against UNRWA.
Well, I think the UN has been very clear. The Secretary General has immediately expressed his deep concerns about the allegations and has stressed the importance of an independent investigation which is taking place right now by the Office of Internal Oversight. Separately, he has appointed former Minister of Foreign Affairs Catherine Colonna to lead what is called the neutrality review. So the allegations are horrible, of course, for a UN organization. At the same time, it's also very clear when you look at the ability of the international humanitarian community to deliver assistance in Gaza right now, there is no substitute for UNRWA's role at present. And I have reiterated that today. A number of ministers, of course, have also stressed that, but they're still negotiating about their own collective.
As the Israeli-Hamas war continues, verbal proceedings have continued at the International Court of Justice on legal consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories.
And still on Israel-Hamas war, oral proceedings have continued at the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. South Africa, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, the Netherlands, Bangladesh and Belgium presented early arguments. More than 50 states and at least 3 international organizations will address judges at the United Nations top court until February the 26th. A non-binding legal opinion is expected after months of deliberation by the judges. Recall that on Monday, Palestinian representatives presented their arguments on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip. They argued that the occupation is illegal and must be brought to an immediate, unconditional, and total end. Israel is not attending the hearings, but sent a 5-page written statement saying an advisory opinion would be harmful to attempts to resolve the conflict because questions posed by the UN General Assembly are prejudiced.